Welcome to another coding tutorial, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make fireworks using particle systems. If you're new to particle systems, I recommend that you check out my other video on basics of particle systems, where I go into the details of what is a particle systems and also lay out the key steps in creating a particle system, and systems of particle systems. But if you want to get more practice, this tutorial would be a good one. I'm going to start by defining a position vector. So let pose, and pose is going to be a vector, which is an object that can hold 2 to 3 values. We're going to use it to hold 2 values, which is the x and y position of the particle. So let's do create vector. Create vector is a method inside the vector class that we can use to create a vector. And where do we want to create it? Let's do it in the middle of the canvas. And then we're going to draw this particle using an ellipse function, which takes in a total of 4 arguments. The first 2 will be the x and y coordinate of the center of the circle. So we can just do pose.x, which is the x position of the position vector, and then pose.y for the y position. How about we give the size as 10? Let's click run. Alright, so now we have the particle in the middle of the canvas. Now let's try to move this particle. So I'm going to define another variable called vel for velocity, which is going to be the speed and direction of this particle. And it's also going to be a vector. In the x direction, I'm going to give it 0. I don't want it to move in the x direction, but in the y direction, I want it to move upwards, just like how a firework would be launched. So how about we give it a magnitude of 2, but the direction is going to be upwards, so -2. And for us to be able to update the position using the velocity vector, we basically just need to add the 2 vectors together. And we can do that using a method inside a vector class called add. So it just pose.add, and then we just put in the vector that we want to add it to. This expression basically just adding the x position of the velocity vector to the x position of the position vector, and same goes for the y component here. Now the particle is moving upwards at this magnitude at a time. Perfect. Now we want to add an acceleration, and this acceleration specifically is going to be called gravity, because it's going to be a gravitational pull that is pulling down this firework. And we basically want to also, first we want to define it, right? Let's do it as a vector as well. In the x direction, it's still going to be 0. But in the y direction, it has a direction of downwards, so it's going to be positive. But I want it to have a magnitude of, let's do 0.1. I want the magnitude to be smaller than the velocity, but over time, as we update the velocity vector will become positive, and so the particle will be falling down. So to update it, we basically just need to add gravity to the velocity vector. So gravity. All right, you see that? So it's going up and then it's coming down. So if we increase the magnitude of the velocity, that means it's harder for the gravitational pull to pull it down. But let's say keep it at 5, but we increase the gravitational pull here. And you see that? It's pulling down much faster. So let's move it back to this. I want to show you the point where the particle moves downward. So how about we print vel.y. Let's do it again. So if we look at this, it starts out at 1.9. It actually starts out at -2, but because I print it after it's already being updated, right? And as we add gravity to this velocity vector, what happens? The magnitude keeps going down and down and down until it turns positive. And this is the point where the particle moves from upward to downward. Let's do it again. This is the point when a y direction of the velocity vector becomes positive. All right, but if I were to also print gravity, do y, you can see that gravity stays constant at 0.1, but because it's being added to the velocity vector, that's why it changed from the start of -2 to some magnitude that is positive, right? All right. How about we put all of this inside a class first? So let's come to this arrow here, click the plus sign, and then click create file. I'm going to call this file particle.js. And then before we start writing a class, let's go to index.html, come to this line of code here, copy and paste. And then we want to change the name here to the name of the new file that we just added. And this is how we integrate a new JavaScript file into the program. All right, so now we're ready to create a class. We're going to call this class particle. Inside the constructor function, we'll need to put what? Position and velocity, right? I want to keep gravity as a global variable. So let's start with these two. Can you delete this? All right, so this .pose is going to be at, let's give it two parameters, x and y. And then for the velocity, I also want to set this as another two parameters as well. So Vx and Vy. And then the display method will be, we don't need this, we'll be drawing this ellipse, right? At this.post.x and then this.post.y. And then the last piece is the update function. So we want to create another method called update. And we're basically going to call these two functions to update the velocity. This is global, so can keep it as gravity. And then this will be this.vel. All right, so once we have this, we're ready to create this one particle object. Let's call it P. And then P is going to be a new particle object, right? And then let's put it in the middle of the canvas. And then the velocity will be 0, -2. Inside the draw function, we're going to call update and display. All right, so this is what we did previously, but now it's in a class called particle. Now let's create a system of particles, which is going to be our Firework class. I'm going to actually change the name P here to Firework, so just one Firework. And I'm doing this because Firework is actually just a particle that is being shoot up, right? But Firework actually has two states. This is the first state. The first state is before it is exploded, right? So it's just being launched and going up. And then the second state is when it is exploded and then it becomes all of these smaller particles. So let's do that. I want to also create another variable called explode. And we're going to set it as false because it starts out as not exploded. All right. And then inside here, we want to say that if explode is equals to false, then we're going to update firework.update and firework.display. But at what point do we want it to explode? The point that we want it to explode is actually when the y component of the velocity vector is greater than or equal to 0, right? Which is the point that I show you when it switches from going upward to downwards. So we're going to come here and we're going to put it in between these two methods here and say if firework.vel.y is greater or equals to 0, then I want to set explode to be equals to true. And then how about we just print that it explode. All right. See, once this becomes greater or equals to 0, explode becomes true, then it doesn't come back to this conditional statement anymore, and that's why we don't see the particle anymore, right? Boop. Explode. Explode. So this is the point where we want it to create a bunch more particles. So we're going to create a variable an array called particles. It's going to be an empty array at first. And how about we create num, another variable, set it to 50. I want to create 50 particle objects. And then inside here, what we're going to do is we're going to call a for loop that goes from I equals 0 to I less than num, right? I plus plus. And then we're basically going to create a bunch more particle objects. So we're going to put it inside the particles array to be new particle object. Where do we want it as the x and y position of this particle? We want it at the point where the x and y position of the firework is when it explodes, right? When firework.val.y is greater or equals to 0. So we're going to put in firework.pose.x, firework.pose.y. And how about the vx and vy, the velocity vector? What do we want it to be? We want it to actually just kind of explode in all directions, right? We want a random vector. So inside here, I'm going to create a new velocity vector, and I'm going to set it to a method inside a vector class called random2d. And this returns a random vector that has a magnitude of 1. So we are going to put val.x here and then val.y. Then let's click run. Oh, so we basically add new objects here, but we have not displayed it. So what we're gonna do is outside this, right? Outside this if statement. So else we're gonna say for let I equals to 0, I less than particles dot length I plus plus. We want to display all of the particles object. Oops, particle is not defined. Oh, I think I want to put all of this maybe outside here. Let's try that. Oh, let's get stuck here. Let's see. So firework is still being displayed even though this becomes false. So explode equals true, then it should come here, val.x and val.y. Let's see what is particles.length. It is being added at 50, but it's not exploding. I'm going to try, how about val vx equals to random of -1 and 1, then vy equal to random of -1 and 1, just to make sure that this thing is correct. Vy, okay, it was correct, but it's not exploding. So, oh, the reason is because I think I did not update it. So I think we need to also update, which means the velocity and gravity will be added to the particles, right? Ah, there you go. Okay, so I want to change it back to the vector method called random2d. And then let's put it as val.x and then val.y. You don't need this. Okay, do you see that? It makes a circle. And that is because the magnitude of this random 2D method is 1. So what we want to also do is multiply it by some random value. So let's do between, how about 1 and 3? All right, so now it's like a real explosion. Okay, what I want to do before we adjust anything else is to change the size of the particle based on whether it's exploded or not. So I'm going to set another variable called size, and then here I also am going to set this dot explode and then put it in here. So this is to identify whether a particle is the stem or if it is the ones that are already exploded. So I'm going to set the size based on this Boolean variable. So if this dot explode is equals to true, then I want the size to be equals to 2. I want it to be small. Else, then I want the size to be 10, which is the size that we have right now. All right, and instead of putting 10 here, we're going to put this dot size, this dot size. Oh, and we also need to add this additional arguments, right? So originally, when we create a firework, this dot explode is equals to false, which is here, right? But then once one explodes equal to true here, we also need to put it inside here. Let's try that. All right, so now it's smaller. The next thing that we're going to do is let us try to see how many particles are there currently. So how about we print, actually, let's do it here, right? At the end here, we're going to print particles dot length 50. It's at 50, right? But now all the particles are off the screen. So what we want to do is that we want to remove all of the particles that are already off the screen from the particles array, right? So to do that, what we need to do is we need to go back to particle.js. We're going to set another variable called life, and we're going to start it at 255. And then we're going to, inside update here, decrement it by a certain amount. Let's do, how about 5? So every time the update function is called, then life is decremented by 5, and then let's just add it as the alpha value here. So -5, and then we're going to do it to stroke as well, not -5, this dot life, right? And then if I click run, it disappears, but the amount is still there, right? Because we haven't done anything, we have not removed it from the array, the particles array yet. So I'm going to set another Boolean variable called this.done, set it as false, and then how about we write another method called finished if this.life is less than 0, right? As we decrement it down, then this.done will be equals to true. But then else, it still is false. And then we want to come here to sketch, right? And then we want to remove it if this.done is equals to true. So what we can do is we're going to first call particles of i.finished, right? To check if it's already done. And then we're going to say if particles of i.done is true, right? Then we want to remove it from the array, and we can use a method called splice. So particles.splice, and splice can take in arguments in multiple ways, but what we're going to do is we're going to provide 2 arguments. The first one is the index of the object that we want to remove. So we want to remove it at I when that particle is done, right? And then we're going to give the second argument as 1, and this is just to tell it that just remove that one object at index I. And then if we click run, oops, I is not defined. Oh, we need to put this inside here. Let's click run. All right, so we cannot see it visually, but now if I were to, let's see, print particles dot length becomes 0. Boop. All right, so it's being removed. But we don't actually want to loop it forward like this. We want to loop it backwards to make sure that none of the objects are being skipped when being checked. So we're going to start let I equals to particles dot length minus 1. If I is greater or equals to 0, I minus minus. And then if we click run, All right, goes from 50 to 0. So now we basically have our system class or Firework class. So I'm going to come to this arrow here, click the plus sign, and then click create file. We're going to create another class called firework.js. Let's go to index.html again, copy this, then let's add firework.js. All right, so now we're going to start by writing class, name it Firework, and then inside the constructor function, we want what? Let's go to sketch.js. We're going to start by actually just copy these. So we want, actually, yeah, this is going to be this.explode, which starts at false. And then we're going to have particles, and we're going to have num here. But first, we need also the position of the fireworks, right? So it's going to also be a vector, which we're going to give it x and y as parameters. And then if we go back to sketch.js, that x and y is going to be the location of where we create the firework, the stem, right? So we're going to copy this as well. And it's going to be a new firework, right? At post this.post.x and then this.post.y. And we want this.explode to be before this line because we're going to put it inside here, right? So this.explode. And then for vx and vy, we can keep as 0 and -2, but I also want to create it as a vector. So let's put it at 0 and -2. And then we're going to put in this.vel.x and then this.vel.y. All right. Next, we want to add all of this. But this is actually going to be broken down into display and update method. So let's see. So let's start with update. All right, so inside update here, let me just move it a bit. I'm going to actually delete display first from here and display from here. And what I'm going to do is we're going to add all the this dot first to make sure that we have all the syntax correct. So this dot, 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 and this dot. Here, 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 here. And that's it. Okay, so what is going on here? So basically inside update we check it if it's not exploded yet, right? Which is the beginning here. We update the firework, which is the stem here, right? And then we check once it is at the point before it moves down, then explode becomes true. Then we create a bunch of particle objects inside a particles array. And then once this happens, then explode becomes true. Then we go into this else statement here, and then we basically check if the particle is finished. Then we update, and then we remove any of the particles that is done. All right, so that's inside the update method. And then inside display, what we need is first a conditional statement that says if this dot explode is false, right? We want to display the firework. Else, we want to display the particle objects inside the particle array. So for let I equal to 0, I less than particles, no, this dot particles dot length i++, then we basically just display all of them. All right. So this is a lot of code. I want to break one more down. I'm gonna call it exploded. And basically, this is the set of code, right? That basically is called when the firework explodes. So I'm gonna add it here. And then basically we're gonna call this method inside this class, and what we can do is we can just use this dot and then the name of the method. All right, that was a lot of coding. So let's just try to create one firework object, which is a system of particles, right? So let's go to sketch.js. We have already defined this firework here. So firework is going to be a new firework object. How about we put it in the middle of the canvas, but let's start it at the bottom, at the very bottom of the canvas, and then we want to update it, and we want to display. Num is not defined. All right, I forgot this dot. Where is it? 45. Okay, this dot num. All right, it worked, but I need to tweak a little bit. As you can see, it's not moving up far enough. So we want it to, how about we give it a random value between -5 and -10. Maybe that's a bit too much, but let's try it. That's not bad. I also want to give it a random value in the x direction, but let's just do -1 and 1. That's pretty good, but it seems to disappear a little bit too fast. So I'm going to, actually, let's change the color of the background to this color. I'm going to also increase the size to 600 for the width. And then inside particle, I want it to, maybe we subtract it by just 2 each time. All right. It looks pretty good. What do you think? Let's create systems of particle systems. So we're going to create a bunch of fireworks. And then now, instead of just one variable here, we're going to create an array of fireworks. And then instead of creating the fireworks here, I'm going to create a function called mouse clicked. And this is a built-in function that is called when we click the mouse. So we're going to add a new object inside the fireworks array, and we can do that by using the method called push. And we're going to push new fireworks object. At what location? I want it to be where I click my mouse. So mouse X and mouse Y. And then now for this, we need to write a for loop, right? That goes from I equals 0 to I less than fireworks dot length I++. Then we're going to call these two methods on all of the objects. All right. Click. Click. Okay. What's missing? Let's print fireworks.length. You know what's coming up. At 0, at 1, 2, even though the fireworks are gone, the length keeps increasing. So we want to take care of that right now. So what we're going to do is basically we need to write a finish method also inside firework.js. So let's do it after exploded here. Finished. So when is it finished? it is finished when the length of the particles array here equals to 0, right? When there are no more particles, when the life of the particle is less than 0. So we're going to say if this dot particles dot length is equals to 0, then this dot done is true. Else this dot done is false. So we want to also start it as false, right? Okay, and then now we're gonna come to sketch.js again, and then we're going to use a splice function to remove the firework object that is done. And first, before we do that, we want to loop it also backwards. So fireworks.length minus 1. If fireworks is greater or equals to 0, I minus minus, then we're gonna do if fireworks of I dot done is equals to true, right? Then fireworks dot splice of I comma 1. And then how about we print fireworks dot length. Right, 1, 2. Oh, what did I do wrong? I did not call the finished methods yet. We're going to call it outside of this. So this dot finished. So this is the finished method as part of the firework class. Let's try that. 1, 2, 1, 0. Perfect. And then go back to 0. Great, so we took care of that. So if we go back to sketch.js, now what I want to do is, instead of creating a new object when we click the mouse, how about we add it at a random interval? So we're going to use an if statement that says if random of 1 is less than 0.1. So random, basically random of 1 returns a value between 0 and 1, not including 1. But if it is less than 0.1, then we want to push a new firework object. Where? Not mouse X and mouse Y. Let's do it at width divided by 2 and height, which we had before. Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good. Actually, let's do it at random width. How about that? Okay, that's nice. All right, how about we add some colors? So we're gonna go to particle.js, and I'm going to add the last parameter here as C. And so this dot C is going to be equals to C, and then we're basically is going to fill this dot C inside here, and then we can just do no stroke. And then I'm gonna go to sketch.js, and I'm going to set a new array called colors, and it's going to be an array, and then inside setup, colors will be this nice array of colors. And inside firework.js, inside this class now, we need to add what this .c is gonna be. So I want to just pick random values. So let's do color of random of colors inside the colors array. All right, and then we just put in this .c here for the stem, right? When we create the new particle object, and we want that same color for when we create a bunch of particles here. So this .c. All right. And here comes the final touch. I want to add some blurring effect to the fireworks. And we can use a method called drawing context, which actually is a native HTML5 canvas functionality. And all we need to do is put in drawing context dot. We're going to be using these two methods, drawing context dot shadow blur, and this is going to give us how big of the blurring effect we want. And then the second one is drawing context dot shadow color, which we're going to give as the this.c color that we have. So I'm going to actually just copy these. We're gonna put it inside the particle class, right? Where? Here. So I'm going to set it at 50. I want it to be a little bit bigger as the blurring effect, and we're going to set color of this.c here. Let's click run. And you see that glowing effect? Make it look like an actual fireworks. But you can see there is a little bit of a lag, and I think it depends on the number that you put here. If we were to put maybe like a slightly smaller number, it might be better. Yeah. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. There's a lot of possibilities that you can do using particle systems, including this one. I also have a playlist of the other tutorials that I have done using particle systems, so be sure to check that out and give this one a try.